She doesn't deserve anything. Let her eat with the servants. My brother's wife snarled. My parents said nothing. I smirked, grabbed my phone. Cancel the deal. A single message. And $26 million was gone. My brother staggered. My mother went white. The bride stared in shock. I walked out and they lost it all. The catering manager looked mortified as she gestured toward the corner table by the kitchen doors. Miss Morrison, your seat is over there. With our staff on break. The entire wedding reception seemed to pause, 200 guests turning to watch me stand in my designer dress, holding my clutch, being directed to sit where the servants ate. Ashley's voice carried across the ballroom, intentionally loud and sharp. She doesn't deserve anything. Let her eat with the servants. My brother Ryan actually laughed. My mother Lauren studied her champagne. My father Matthew checked his phone. Not one person in my family said a word as I walked to that wobbling table, my heels clicking against marble while whispers followed in my wake. What they didn't know was that I controlled the $26 million investment keeping their empire alive, and my phone held 3 words that would destroy everything. The catering staff at table 14 shifted uncomfortably as I approached, unsure whether to stand or acknowledge me. One young woman in a server's uniform actually started to get up, assuming I was lost, before the manager whispered something that made her face flush with second-hand embarrassment. I sat down on the uncomfortable metal chair, so different from the cushioned seats at the decorated tables, and placed my clutch beside a container of half-eaten staff lunch. The contrast was deliberate, orchestrated, meant to remind me of my place in their world. 3 hours earlier, I had been in Ryan's office, reviewing the final merger documents that would save Morrison Holdings from its latest crisis. The numbers were devastating without the Hartwell investment. We had maybe 6 weeks of operating capital left, 8 if I performed another miracle with our creditors. Ryan had burned through $2 million on an expansion into markets he never researched against my explicit warnings. The technology infrastructure upgrade he insisted on had compatibility issues with our existing systems, something I would have caught if anyone had bothered to include me in the planning meetings. Just sign here, Lex, Ryan had said, sliding the papers across his mahogany desk without looking up from his phone. Standard minority shareholder approval. Ashley's father needs it by tonight. He didn't mention that my signature would also approve dissolving my position post-merger. He probably assumed I hadn't read the fine print buried on page 47. But I had read everything, including the email Ashley carelessly left open on his computer screen the previous week when she borrowed his office for a call. The one outlining their plans to restructure Morrison Holdings into a Hartwell subsidiary, with all Morrison family members except Ryan removed from operations within 6 months. This morning had started like every other morning for the past 15 years. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., though I was already awake, running through mental calculations of how to keep Morrison Holdings afloat for another day. The coffee maker in the kitchen gurgled while I reviewed overnight emails from our Asian suppliers, addressing concerns Ryan wouldn't even know existed. There was a dispute about payment terms that could cost us a crucial manufacturing contract. I drafted a response offering a creative solution involving partial advance payments and performance bonuses, then sent it from Ryan's email address. He'd never know the crisis had existed, let alone been resolved. By 6 a.m., I was reviewing the quarterly reports that would be presented at next week's board meeting. The reports Ryan would read from cards I'd written, delivering insights I'd developed, taking credit for strategies I'd implemented while he was sleeping off another late night at the country club. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School while Ryan had barely scraped through State College on a legacy admission, yet here I was, ghostwriting his executive communications. Lauren came downstairs at 7 a.m., her silk robe pristine, her face already made up for her charity luncheon. She glanced at me hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by financial documents and merger contracts. Don't make a mess, Lexi. The cleaning lady doesn't come until tomorrow. She poured herself green tea, a recent affectation since reading that coffee was aging. And please remember to pick up Ryan's dry cleaning. He needs his blue suit for the rehearsal dinner. I wanted to tell her that I had just saved us from defaulting on a $3 million loan by negotiating an extension with the bank president at 4 a.m. I wanted to explain that the mess on the table was the only thing standing between the Morrison family and bankruptcy court. Instead, I nodded and added dry cleaning to the list of errands I'd run between crisis management calls. The humiliation at this wedding wasn't new. It was simply the most public display of what had been happening behind closed doors for decades. When I was 16 and won a national mathematics competition, the trophy went in the basement storage room. When Ryan came in third at a regional golf tournament, Matthew commissioned a display case for the den. When I received a full scholarship to Harvard, Lauren told her friends I was going away for school studying something with numbers. When Ryan got a job at Morrison Holdings straight out of college, there was a party with 200 guests. Now, sitting at the servants' table while Ashley preened in her $40,000 dress, telling her bridesmaids how she and Ryan would modernize Morrison Holdings by cutting the dead weight, I felt the weight of every dismissed achievement, every stolen credit, every moment of erasure pressing down on my shoulders. The young server next to me apologetically moved her sandwich further away, as if my presence had contaminated her break space. Across the ballroom, I watched Matthew give a toast about legacy and family values, his voice carrying over the clinking of crystal glasses I wasn't deemed worthy to drink from. My phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer confirming everything was in place. The shell companies I'd built over 5 years of secret late-night work. The controlling interests I'd acquired in every vendor Morrison Holdings couldn't survive without. The private equity firm I owned through a Delaware LLC that held their restructured debt. One text message would transfer everything to Lexington Capital, my company built with my savings, my connections, my intelligence that they'd used but never acknowledged. I looked at Ryan laughing with his groomsmen, at Lauren adjusting her pearls while gossiping with her society friends, at Matthew checking his phone for market updates on a company he didn't know was already dead. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought the servants' table was my humiliation. They had no idea it would be their destruction. The contrast between that servants' table and the quarterly family meeting 2 weeks earlier should have prepared me for what was coming. I had arrived at the Morrison family home at 3 p.m. sharp, carrying the financial reports that would determine whether we survived another quarter. The house smelled of Lauren's signature potpourri mixed with Matthew's cigars, a combination that always made my throat tight. Ryan's Porsche was already in the driveway, parked at an angle that blocked half the street. I heard her voice before I saw her. High, crystalline, the kind of voice that had never been told to lower itself. "This place has such character," she was saying as I entered through the kitchen door. The pause before character told me everything about what she really thought of our family home. Ashley Hartwell stood in our living room like an art installation that didn't match the walls. Her cream designer suit probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. Her blonde hair fell in waves that looked effortless but required weekly salon visits I knew about from Ryan's credit card statements. She was examining our family photos on the mantel with the kind of detached interest you'd give to artifacts in a museum you'd never visit again. Ryan hovered beside her, his chest puffed out with pride. "Ashley, this is Lexi," he said when he noticed me. "She helps out with the paperwork sometimes." I had just spent 48 hours untangling a contract dispute that could have cost us our biggest client. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my fingers were still cramped from typing revision after revision of the settlement agreement. But I extended my hand politely. "I'm the Chief Operating Officer," I corrected quietly. Ashley's handshake was exactly what I expected. Limp, brief, her fingers barely grazing mine before pulling away. "Oh, Ryan mentioned you do the filing. How nice that family businesses can find roles for everyone." Ryan laughed. Actually laughed. "Lexi's being generous with her title. She's more of an internal consultant. Ashley's father owns Hartwell Industries." The Hartwell Industries. Of course I knew who Victor Hartwell was. I'd been tracking his acquisitions for 3 years, watching him swallow company after company, strip them of assets and leave shells behind. Morrison Holdings was exactly the kind of vulnerable target he typically pursued. Matthew appeared from his study, his face lighting up at the sight of Ashley like she was already writing checks. "Miss Hartwell, Ryan didn't mention you'd be joining us for the family meeting." "I hope it's not an intrusion," Ashley said with practiced charm. "Ryan thought it would be good for me to understand the family dynamics before we make things official." Make things official. The words hung in the air like a threat dressed as a promise. We moved to the dining room that doubled as our conference room. I had already arranged my papers at my usual seat, the one closest to the door where I could access files from Matthew's study quickly. But Matthew swept my documents aside, gathering them into an untidy pile and moving them to the side counter. Ashley, please take this seat. Better lighting for you. Lexi, you don't mind taking notes today, do you? Your handwriting is so much clearer than Ryan's. I stood there for a moment holding my laptop and the reports I'd prepared, watching Ashley settle into my chair. She crossed her legs and placed her phone on the table where my quarterly analysis should have been. Ryan pulled out the chair beside her, the one where I usually sat when presenting financial projections. Matthew took his position at the head of the table. Lauren emerged from the kitchen with a tray of her good china, the set she only used for important guests. I sat up at the side counter, my back to them, typing on my laptop while they discussed Morrison Holdings' future as if I wasn't there. Revenue is up 12% this quarter, Ryan announced, reading from the executive summary I'd written for him that morning. He stumbled over the word amortization, pronounced liquidity wrong twice, but Ashley gazed at him like he was Warren Buffett. That's incredible growth, Ashley murmured. Daddy will be impressed. I wanted to point out that the revenue growth came from 3 new contracts I'd negotiated while Ryan was on his golf trip to Scottsdale. I wanted to explain that the improved cash flow resulted from payment terms I'd restructured during midnight calls with vendors. Instead, I typed meeting notes no one would ever read. After dinner, Lauren's overdone roast that Ashley barely touched, Ryan stood up with the kind of theatrical timing he must have rehearsed. He tapped his champagne glass with a knife, the crystal ringing through the room. I have an announcement. 2 announcements, actually. He reached for Ashley's hand. First, Ashley and I are engaged. Lauren gasped with delight that sounded genuine. Matthew nodded approvingly, already calculating the social capital this union would bring. I typed Ryan announced engagement to A. Hartwell, and tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. And second, Ryan continued, his voice taking on what he thought was a businesslike tone, the Hartwell family has agreed to a revolutionary partnership with Morrison Holdings. We're talking about a $26 million investment that will transform us from a regional player to a national force. Ashley's fingers flew across her phone screen as Ryan spoke. She wasn't even trying to hide it. When she set the phone down to reach for her water glass, I could see part of her screen from where I stood. The message was to someone named James, probably her assistant. The sister situation will be handled after signatures. Dad wants her neutralized before Q3. Neutralized? Like I was a chemical spill that needed containing. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed wedding venues and merger strategies, honeymoon destinations and hostile takeovers, as if they were all part of the same transaction. Which I realized they were. This wasn't a marriage. It was an acquisition and Morrison Holdings was the target. Later, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee and Lauren's dry store-bought cookies she tried to pass off as homemade, I stayed behind to clean up. That's when I found it, abandoned on the table like Ryan's responsibility. A draft of the Hartwell investment contract, 47 pages of legal language that would determine our family's future. I closed the contract draft and placed it carefully in my bag. The house had gone quiet, just the distant sound of Lauren's forced laughter from the living room. My fingers traced the edge of the pages through the leather, feeling the weight of evidence that would either bury me or set me free. That night I didn't go home to my apartment. I drove to the office park on the outskirts of town where I kept a small unit under a name that wasn't quite mine. The fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing what 5 years of rage had built. 3 monitors sat on a desk purchased from a liquidation sale. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer containing documents for companies that existed only in Delaware's corporate registry. This was where Lexington Capital lived, breathed, and grew while my family slept. The logistics company had been my first move, born from desperation and insomnia. Morrison Holdings relied on Brennan Logistics for everything: shipping, warehousing, last-mile delivery. They paid their invoices 60 days late, sometimes 90, treating Brennan like a servant who should be grateful for scraps. Old man Brennan was dying of cancer, his son had no interest in the business, and they needed someone who understood their value. I bought them for $80,000, every penny saved from years of ghostwriting Ryan's reports, solving Matthew's problems, and never taking a salary commensurate with my work. The ownership was hidden behind Goldfish LC, named after Mr. Bubbles, the pet I'd had when I was 7 and still believed fair meant equal. Within 6 months, I'd restructured their operations, improved their margins by 30%, and quietly raised their rates to Morrison Holdings by 15%. Ryan signed the new contracts without reading them. Next came TechBridge Solutions, the startup managing Morrison Holdings' entire digital infrastructure. The founder, David Park, was brilliant but terrible at business. He'd built systems that kept our operations running, but Ryan treated him like an IT janitor. I approached David through a third party, offered him real equity and respect, and absorbed his company into Marina Ventures, another shell that traced back to an address in Delaware where no one worked but paperwork lived. Each acquisition followed the same pattern. Find the companies Morrison Holdings needed but mistreated. Buy them through entities that couldn't be traced to me. Improve their operations while maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. By year 3, I controlled 6 critical vendors. By year 5, I held the strings to everything that kept Morrison Holdings alive. The wall above my desk looked like something from a conspiracy theorist's basement. Red string connected printed corporate documents, photos of shell company registrations, and flowcharts showing how money moved through the maze I'd created. At the center was Morrison Holdings, surrounded by the web I'd woven. Looking at it from a distance, it resembled a spider's trap with my family's company as the fly. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Margaret Chin. We need to talk." I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 15 years. Matthew's sister had been erased from family history for the crime of refusing to marry the banker Matthew had selected for her. Lauren had removed her photos from the family albums. Her name was forbidden at dinners. But I remembered her, fierce, brilliant, unwilling to shrink herself for anyone's comfort. We met at a truck stop diner 40 miles outside the city. She looked exactly as I remembered but sharper, like exile had carved away everything soft. Her suit was expensive but understated. Her handshake was firm. She ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. "I've been watching you," she said. "Through corporate filings, financial reports, the invisible trails you think no one follows. You're building something. I want to know why." I could have lied, but something in her eyes told me she already knew. So I told her everything. The systematic erasure. The stolen credit. The morning routines that started at 5:30 a.m. while Ryan slept until noon. The contracts I negotiated that bore his signature. The company I'd saved repeatedly while being treated like furniture. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding like she was checking items off a mental list. When I finished, she pulled out a tablet and showed me her own web. She'd built a consulting firm worth $40 million. Her clients included 3 firms that held Morrison Holdings debt. "I know their largest creditor," she said. "Blackstone Private Equity. I helped them restructure 2 other acquisitions. They trust me. If you want real control, you need their debt. I can make that happen, but I want something in return." "What?" "I want to watch Matthew realize his empire was destroyed by the 2 women he tried to erase." The partnership formed over bitter coffee and shared wounds. Margaret introduced me to Jonathan Blackstone through a conference call where I was presented as a private investor interested in distressed assets. We negotiated for 3 weeks. I leveraged everything. My shadow companies, my savings, a loan against future earnings from the vendors I controlled. When the dust settled, Lexington Capital owned 60% of Morrison Holdings debt through a subsidiary called Phoenix Ventures. The next phase required patience. I spent months creating detailed documentation of every transaction, every late payment Morrison Holdings made to vendors I controlled, every contract Ryan had signed without reading. The paper trail was perfect, legal, and devastating. Then Ashley made her mistake. 3 days before the wedding, she left herself logged into her email on the conference room computer. Ryan had asked me to back up the servers, a menial task he'd forgotten until the IT contractor threatened to quit. I was alone in the office at 10 p.m., the building empty except for security, when I noticed her inbox still open on the screen. The email to Victor Hartwell was time-stamped that afternoon. "Once she signs, we can finally push her out. She doesn't deserve anything anyway. Ryan agrees the company runs better without family complications." Attached was a restructuring plan that eliminated my position, dissolved my shares, and installed Hartwell Associates in every key role. They'd even allocated my office to Ashley's personal assistant. I forwarded everything to 3 locations: my personal server, Margaret's secure email, and my lawyer's encrypted system. Then I sat in the dark conference room staring at the screen, feeling something inside me crystallize into absolute certainty. The certainty that had crystallized in the conference room stayed with me through the next 72 hours. I shut down the computer, locked the office, and drove home through empty streets while the city slept, unaware that the foundations of Morrison Holdings had already shifted. The wedding preparations would proceed exactly as planned. I would play my role perfectly one last time. Lauren called at 7 a.m. sharp 3 days before the wedding. The dress fitting is at 2. Don't be late, Lexi. We need family unity for this. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when issuing orders disguised as requests. I agreed, already knowing what awaited me at Celestine's Bridal, the boutique where Ashley had been holding court for 6 months. The shop smelled like gardenias mixed with something synthetic that made my throat tight. Ashley stood on a raised platform surrounded by mirrors that multiplied her image into infinity. The $40,000 dress cascaded around her in waves of silk and hand-sewn pearls. Her bridesmaids, 3 Hartwell Industries executives and 2 society friends, sat on cream-colored chairs, sipping champagne from crystal flutes. Finally, Ashley said when she saw me, though I was 5 minutes early. Someone needs to fix this hem. The seamstress has clumsy fingers. The elderly seamstress, Mrs. Park, who had been altering wedding dresses for 30 years, stood quietly to the side, her face carefully blank. I recognized the expression. It was the same one I wore at family dinners. Lexi, get down here and hold the train while I walk, Ashley commanded, not asked. I need to see how it moves. I knelt on the boutique's floor, the carpet rough against my knees through my dress pants. The train was heavier than it looked, weighted with thousands of seed pearls. Ashley began walking in a slow circle while I shuffled behind her on my knees, keeping the fabric from touching the ground. So, one of the bridesmaids said, her voice carrying that false casualness that precedes cruelty, "What's your role in the wedding, Lexi?" Ashley laughed before I could answer. "Oh, Lexi's not in the wedding party. She'll be handling logistics. You know, making sure the vendors arrive on time, dealing with any problems. She's very good at managing details." "Like a wedding planner?" another bridesmaid asked. "No, more like..." Ashley paused, pretending to search for the right word. "Support staff. Every family has someone who handles the unglamorous tasks." They all laughed. Lauren, who had been sitting in the corner scrolling through her phone, looked up briefly, saw me on my knees holding Ashley's train, and returned to her screen without saying a word. The seamstress, Mrs. Park, made a small sound in her throat that might have been disapproval, but no one else noticed. "Actually," Ashley continued, still walking in circles while I crawled behind her, "we're restructuring everything after the merger. Making Morrison Holdings more professional. Less nepotism, more merit-based positions." She glanced down at me. "Some changes will be hard but necessary." The champagne flutes clinked as the bridesmaids toasted to necessary changes. I kept my face neutral, my hands steady on the pearl-encrusted fabric, filing away every word, every laugh, every moment of calculated humiliation. Mrs. Park met my eyes in the mirror and I saw something there. Recognition, perhaps, or pity. I looked away. 2 nights later, my apartment doorbell rang at 2 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw Ryan swaying in the hallway, his tie askew, his usually perfect hair sticking up at odd angles. I opened the door and he practically fell inside, bourbon fumes preceding him like a toxic cloud. "Lex," he slurred, stumbling toward my couch. "My favorite sister." "Your only sister," I corrected, watching him collapse onto the cushions. He laughed, the sound hollow and sharp. "That's what I love about you. Always correcting. Always precise." He grabbed my hand suddenly, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so drunk. "You know I appreciate you, right? Everything you do for the company. For me." For a heartbeat I felt something crack in my chest. Maybe, finally, he understood. Maybe the alcohol had dissolved whatever wall prevented him from seeing me as more than a function. "I need you to do something for me," he continued, his eyes trying to focus on my face. "The contracts. The Hartwell contracts. Just sign them tomorrow. Don't read them, reading wastes time. Ashley's father gets annoyed by delays." "Ryan. You trust me, right?" His grip tightened. "You've always been so good at following instructions. That's what I tell Ashley. Lexi never causes problems. Lexi always does what needs to be done." The crack in my chest sealed itself with ice. What does the contract say about my position? He waved his free hand dismissively. Details. Ashley and her father will handle all that. They're very good at structuring things efficiently. He yawned, his eyes closing. Just sign where they tell you. For family. Within minutes he was snoring, sprawled across my couch in his $1,000 suit. I sat in the chair across from him watching my brother sleep off his latest binge and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no disappointment, just the cold clarity of understanding. To him I wasn't a person. I was a tool, and tools don't read contracts. Tools don't ask questions. Tools just perform their function until they're no longer needed. I covered him with a blanket, not out of love but habit, and went to my bedroom where my laptop waited. The destruct sequence was already programmed, waiting for activation. Every document transferred, every contract adjusted, every piece of leverage positioned. 3 words would trigger it all. The morning of the wedding arrived with cruel sunshine. My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with a text from the wedding coordinator. Miss Morrison, table 14. Service entrance for arrival, please. Mrs. Hartwell's specific request. I called the coordinator, knowing what I would hear but needing the confirmation. Hi, this is Lexi Morrison. I think there might be an error with my seating assignment. The woman's nervous pause told me everything. No, miss. No error. Mrs. Hartwell, the elder Mrs. Hartwell, was very specific. She said you'd be more comfortable there, away from the main festivities. Near the kitchen entrance. With the catering staff on break. I see. Thank you for confirming. I ended the call and opened my laptop. The phone app was ready, the 3-word message queued. All the documentation Margaret and I had assembled was uploaded to secure servers. The cascade would be instant and irreversible. I closed my laptop and dressed carefully for what would be the last time I'd play the role of the invisible sister. The designer dress I'd purchased cost more than I'd ever spent on clothing, chosen specifically to blend with the Hartwell aesthetic while carrying my own quiet armor. Navy blue, understated, expensive enough that no one could claim I'd embarrassed the family, forgettable enough that I'd fade into the background exactly as they expected. The drive to the Hartwell estate took 40 minutes through morning traffic. I passed 3 accidents, red lights flashing against wet pavement from an earlier rain, and thought about how quickly things could change direction. One moment you're driving forward, the next everything is sideways and broken. The metaphor felt heavy-handed but appropriate. The estate gates stood open, decorated with white roses and baby's breath that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A valet in a crisp uniform approached my car, then hesitated when he saw me. Are you with the catering company? He asked, his eyes scanning my dress with confusion. I'm Lexi Morrison, the groom's sister. His face flushed. My apologies, Miss Morrison. Please, straight ahead to the main entrance. But when I reached the main entrance, another coordinator intercepted me. Vendors and staff use the side entrance, she said briskly, not really looking at me. I'm family, I said quietly. She glanced at her tablet, scrolled, frowned. Morrison. Oh yes. Table 14. Actually, you are supposed to use the service entrance. Mrs. Hartwell's notes are very specific. The service entrance led through a narrow hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and fresh bread from the kitchen. Servers rushed past carrying trays, barely noticing me. I emerged into the reception area where hundreds of guests mingled in clusters, their laughter bright and sharp like breaking crystal. I recognized several faces: board members from Morrison Holdings, investors I'd personally courted, vendors I'd negotiated with at 3 a.m. to save Ryan's deals. None of them saw me, or if they did, their eyes slid past without recognition. The name cards were displayed on an elegant table near the entrance. Tables 1 through 10 were printed on ivory cardstock with gold calligraphy. Tables 11 through 13 had silver lettering on cream paper. Table 14 was handwritten on plain white paper, the ink slightly smudged. Lexi M. It read, not even my full name. The table itself sat in the corner by the kitchen doors, partially hidden behind a potted plant. 3 catering staff members were already seated there, looking uncomfortable in their black uniforms. I sat down with the same composure I'd maintained through 1,000 humiliations. The chair was metal, not cushioned like the others. The tablecloth was plain white, not embroidered. Even the silverware was different. Functional steel instead of polished silver. You don't have to sit here, one of the servers whispered, a young woman with kind eyes. This is just where we take our breaks. Apparently I do, I replied, and something in my voice made her stop asking questions. The cocktail hour began with the soft clink of glasses and the hum of conversation. I remained at my table watching the elaborate dance of social positioning. Then I saw him approaching. Victor Hartwell himself, walking with the measured stride of someone who had never hurried for anyone. He was shorter than his photos suggested, but his presence filled space in a way that had nothing to do with height. His suit probably cost more than most cars. His watch definitely did. He stopped directly in front of me, his eyes conducting an assessment that felt like being scanned by a machine. You must be the sister, he said. Not Lexi, not Miss Morrison, just the sister, like I was a concept rather than a person. I stood because sitting would have given him even more power. Lexi Morrison. He didn't acknowledge the correction. Ryan tells me you've been helpful with the transition. Good. I appreciate people who know when to step aside. His smile was thin, perfunctory, the kind you'd give to someone you were about to fire. After today, Morrison Holdings enters a new era. Professional. Efficient. Family sentiment has no place in real business. Family sentiment, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. Is that what you call it when someone saves a company from bankruptcy 3 times? His eyes narrowed slightly, the first genuine reaction I'd seen. Ryan mentioned you assist with administrative tasks. Ryan mentions a lot of things that aren't quite accurate. He studied me for another moment, then dismissed whatever thought had crossed his mind. After today, accuracy will be my team's responsibility. Enjoy the celebration, miss. He paused, having already forgotten my name, then walked away without finishing. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I saw them approaching. Matthew and Ryan, moving through the crowd with the determined stride of men on a mission. Ryan carried a leather folder. Matthew's face wore the expression he used for firing people. Lexi, Ryan said, slightly out of breath. We need the signatures now. Before the ceremony. The Hartwell contracts? I asked innocently. Just a formality, Ryan insisted, already opening the folder and pushing a pen into my hand. The pages were deliberately shuffled out of order, with signature lines highlighted but the surrounding text obscured. Sign here and we can all enjoy the celebration. I took the documents, pretending to scan them while actually confirming what I already knew. Page 23, hidden in the middle. The undersigned hereby relinquishes all shareholding interest in Morrison Holdings, effective immediately upon completion of the merger. Page 31. All family positions will be subject to restructuring per Hartwell Industries operational requirements. Page 45. Previous verbal or written agreements regarding employment or ownership are hereby null and void. This eliminates my shareholding entirely, I said, looking up with practiced confusion. Surely that's a mistake? Ryan's face went red. It's not, it's just restructuring. For efficiency. The Hartwells have a more modern approach to corporate structure. Modern meaning family members become expendable? Matthew's patience snapped. Don't make this difficult, Lexi. Not today. You've had a good run, but it's time to let the professionals handle things. The professionals, I repeated softly. Is that what we're calling the Hartwells now? Just sign the papers, Matthew said, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used when I was a child refusing to go to bed. I set the pen down gently on the table. I need to use the restroom first. The contracts will still be here in 5 minutes. Ryan grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. Lexi, we need this now. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I looked at his hand on my wrist, then at his face, and something in my expression made him let go. 5 minutes, I said, and walked away, leaving them standing there with their unsigned contracts in their growing panic. The bathroom mirror reflected a face I barely recognized. Calm, composed, ready. I washed my hands slowly, watching the water run clear while outside the ceremony was beginning. The string quartet had started playing, their music drifting through the walls. I dried my hands on the monogram towels that bore the intertwined H&M, Hartwell and Morrison, a union that would last exactly as long as this reception. When I returned to the main hall, the ceremony had concluded. Guests were finding their seats for dinner, the rustle of expensive fabric and gentle clink of jewelry filling the space. The wedding party sat at their elevated table, Ashley glowing in her pearls and satisfaction, Ryan beside her looking relieved that the formalities were complete. He caught my eye across the room and mouthed the papers with barely concealed panic. I walked past him without acknowledgement, returning to my corner table where the catering staff had rotated shifts. The servers brought out the first course, some elaborate creation involving truffle foam that looked more like art than food. My table received simple salads, apparently even the menu had a hierarchy. I picked up my fork as Ashley's voice suddenly pierced through the ambient conversation. She was standing, champagne glass in hand, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Before we continue, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. Everyone who matters to the future of Morrison Holdings." She paused, her eyes finding me in the corner. Of course, not everyone understands their place in that future. Some people think they deserve more than they've earned. The room grew quieter, sensing drama beneath the veneer of a toast. Ashley's smile sharpened. "But don't worry, we've made arrangements for everyone. Even those who should be grateful just to be included at all." She looked directly at me. "She doesn't deserve anything. Let her eat with the servants." The words landed exactly as she'd intended. Public, deliberate, final. Her bridesmaids laughed, that particular kind of laugh that comes from those who align themselves with power. Several Hartwell executives joined in. Ryan, my brother who I'd saved from bankruptcy 3 times, who I'd covered for since we were children, actually smirked. Lauren turned her face away, suddenly fascinated by the floral centerpiece. Matthew checked his phone, scrolling through nothing rather than acknowledge what was happening. The investors and board members I'd personally cultivated shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The catering staff at my table looked at their plates, embarrassed for me, embarrassed to be associated with this moment. Something inside me didn't break. It crystallized. Years of being overlooked, undervalued, erased. It all condensed into this single moment of public humiliation. They thought they were putting me in my place. They had no idea they'd just armed the weapon that would destroy them. I reached into my clutch with movements so calm they seemed choreographed. My phone felt cool in my hand, familiar as breathing. The encrypted app opened with my thumbprint. Margaret had insisted on military-grade security. The message was already typed, waiting. 3 words that would cascade into their destruction. "Cancel the deal." I pressed send. The effect was immediate but initially invisible. Somewhere, lawyers received notifications. Contracts began dissolving. Transfers initiated. The company's Morrison Holdings depended on logistics, technology, infrastructure, suddenly belonged exclusively to Lexington Capital. The debt I controlled through Phoenix Ventures was called in. Credit lines frozen. Access to digital systems revoked. $26 million in promised investment evaporated along with every safety net Morrison Holdings had left. I set my phone face down on the table and picked up my water glass, taking a small sip. The first course continued around me, oblivious guests enjoying truffle foam while an empire collapsed in real time. Victor Hartwell's phone buzzed first. He glanced at it absently, then did a double take. His face changed like weather, confusion, understanding, then rage. More alerts followed, his phone lighting up like an emergency beacon. He stood so abruptly his chair crashed backward, the sound echoing through the reception hall like a gunshot. "What is this?" His voice cut through every conversation, sharp enough to shatter the crystal glasses. He was scrolling frantically through messages, his legal team's phones all erupting simultaneously. "The contracts are void? The funding is withdrawn? What incompetence is this?" Ryan fumbled for his own phone, his face going pale as he read the first message. Then the second. Then the flood that followed. Board members calling emergency meetings. Creditors demanding immediate payment. Vendors confirming contract cancellations. Every pillar holding Morrison Holdings upright had been removed simultaneously. Victor's voice rose to a roar. "This is finished. We don't invest in amateurs who can't control their own board." He didn't even look at Ryan or Ashley, just stormed toward the exit, his entire legal team scrambling behind him like a retreating army. "The wedding gifts will be returned," he called over his shoulder. "The marriage will be annulled. We don't associate with failure." The string quartet had stopped playing, their instruments hanging uselessly as they watched the chaos unfold. Guests began pushing back from their tables, phones appearing in hands, whispered conversations erupting. The Hartwell family was evacuating. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all following Victor's exit as if the building were on fire. Ashley stood frozen at the head table, her $40,000 dress suddenly looking like a costume for a cancelled performance. "Daddy," she called out, but Victor was already gone. She whirled on Ryan. "What did you do? What happened to the contracts?" Ryan's phone crashed to the floor as his hands shook too violently to hold it. The screen cracked, spider webbing like the future he'd imagined. Matthew had gone rigid, his own phone showing notification after notification of catastrophe. Morrison Holdings stock price plummeting. Emergency board meeting called. Vote of no confidence proposed. Bankruptcy attorneys reaching out proactively. Lauren's society friends were already gathering their clutches, making excuses about early mornings and forgotten appointments. The social contamination was spreading faster than spilled wine, everyone distancing themselves from the Morrison name as if it were diseased. "What did you do?" Ryan's voice cracked across the ballroom, high and desperate like a child's. Every head turned between us. Him at the head table in his perfect tuxedo, me at the servants' table in my understated dress. I stood slowly, taking time to smooth my skirt, to place my napkin beside my plate. The room held its breath as I walked toward them, my heels clicking against marble in the sudden silence. "I gave you exactly what you thought I deserved," I said, my voice carrying perfectly in the hushed space. "Nothing." The words hung between us in the devastated ballroom, my declaration echoing off marble walls that had witnessed the complete dismantling of the Morrison empire. Ryan stood frozen, his mouth working soundlessly, trying to process how his invisible sister had just become the architect of his destruction. Behind him, the head table looked like a tableau of ruin, abandoned champagne flutes, Ashley's bouquet lying sideways, chairs pushed back in haste as if people had fled a fire. The exodus accelerated. I watched from my position between the two worlds, the servants' table behind me, the wreckage of the main reception before me, as guests streamed toward the exits. Martin Webb, our biggest investor after the Hartwells, was already on his phone, his voice carrying across the room. "Pull everything from Morrison Holdings." "Yes, everything. Tonight." His wife gathered her shawl without even looking back, their 20-year relationship with our family severed in 20 seconds. The wedding photographer lowered his camera, realizing there would be no more moments worth capturing. The videographer was already packing equipment, muttering about partial payment. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments on their stands, slipping out through the service entrance I'd been directed to use. Even the wait staff began clearing tables that still held full plates, their training overriding the spectacle. Ashley's bridesmaids clustered near the gift table, frantically texting, their coordinated navy dresses now looking like uniforms of association with failure. One of them, Victoria I think, actually began removing the Morrison Holdings pin from her clutch, dropping it on the table like it was contaminated. "This isn't happening," Ashley kept repeating, her voice climbing higher with each repetition. "Daddy will fix this. He always fixes things." But Victor Hartwell was gone, his convoy of black SUVs already pulling away from the estate. The $26 million promise had evaporated with my 3-word text, and with it, any obligation he felt toward his daughter's choices. Ryan stumbled toward me, his gait unsteady like he'd been physically struck. His boutonniere hung crooked, the white rose brown at the edges. The confident heir who'd stood at the altar an hour ago had been replaced by someone I recognized from years of cleaning up his messes. Desperate, confused, looking for someone else to blame. "Lexi, please," he started, his voice cracking on my name. "We can work this out. It's family. You don't understand what you've done. Dad's legacy, everything we built." The laugh that escaped me was sharp enough to make him step back. It wasn't a sound I'd planned to make, but years of suppressed responses had to go somewhere. "Everything W built?" I let the pronoun hang in the air like an accusation. "Name one deal you closed yourself. One crisis you solved. One time you saved this company." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "The Henderson acquisition. I met with Henderson 37 times at 5 a.m. while you were sleeping off hangovers." Next. "The bridge funding from David Chin, my Harvard roommate's husband, who trusted my word, not yours." Try again. "The supplier contracts. Negotiated at 3 a.m. while you were at casino nights. using relationships I built over years of fixing your mistakes. Each word landed like a physical blow. Ryan's face crumpled, the facade he'd worn his entire life finally cracking. "I'm your brother," he whispered as if that relationship meant anything after decades of erasure. "I saved Morrison Holdings 17 times while you took credit," I continued, my voice steady as a metronome. "I built the connections you're desperately calling right now. The only thing you ever built was a reputation on my back, and now you can wear its collapse." Lauren materialized beside him like a ghost in designer clothing. Her makeup, applied so carefully this morning, had given way to streaks of mascara that no amount of expensive waterproofing could prevent. Her hands shook as she reached toward me, stopping just short of contact as if I might burn her. "How could you destroy your own family?" The question came out as a whisper, but it carried the weight of genuine incomprehension. For the first time in years I looked at my mother, really looked at her. The careful composure she'd worn like armor my entire life had cracked, revealing something I'd never seen before: fear. Not anger, not disappointment, but genuine terror at losing the only identity she'd ever claimed: Matthew Morrison's wife, Ryan Morrison's mother. "You destroyed me first," I said, each word deliberate and clean. "Every birthday you forgot because you were planning Ryan's parties. Every achievement you ignored because it didn't have his name on it. Every time you let me eat alone while you celebrated his mediocrity. You killed your daughter years ago, Lauren. I'm just returning the favor with interest." The recognition that flooded her eyes was worth more than any apology could have been. He knew. Had always known. Every slight had been deliberate, every erasure a choice. She'd sacrificed one child to elevate another, and now the bill had come due. Matthew appeared beside them, his phone clutched uselessly in his hand. His face had aged a decade in 10 minutes, the powerful patriarch reduced to an old man watching his empire burn. "The board's called an emergency meeting," he said to no one in particular. "They're voting me out. 30 years and they're voting me out." Ashley, abandoned by her father and her future, approached our family grouping with the unsteady gait of someone in shock. Her cathedral-length veil dragged behind her, picking up debris from the collapsed celebration. Her voice, when she found it, was shrill with rage. "You're nobody," she screamed, mascara running in rivers down her cheeks. "You're nothing. You can't do this to us." I stood from the servants' table for the last time, rising with the slow dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. I walked past her, past my family, past the wreckage of their ambitions. Then I stopped, turned back, and delivered my final words quietly enough that Ashley had to lean in to hear them. "I'm the woman who just turned your $26 million investment into worthless paper. I'm the one who owns every company your father needs to salvage his reputation. I'm the sister-in-law you should have treated with respect. Now you're the one who deserves nothing. Enjoy eating the scraps of what's left." I left Ashley standing in her ruined wedding dress and walked through the service entrance I'd been directed to use just hours earlier. The hallway that had felt like a humiliation now felt like a portal between who I'd been and who I was becoming. My heels echoed differently against the concrete, no longer the sound of someone being dismissed but someone dismissing an entire life of servitude. The valet who'd mistaken me for catering staff stood confused as guests streamed past him, their expensive cars creating a traffic jam of escape. He saw me approaching and started to apologize again, but I handed him a $100 bill. "You were just following instructions," I said. "That's what employees do. I used to be very good at it." My car was exactly where I'd parked it, modest and practical between the luxury vehicles that were now peeling out of the estate. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, watching the chaos through my rearview mirror. The estate's lights were still blazing, but shadows moved frantically behind windows. The fairy lights strung through the gardens swayed in the evening breeze, illuminating nothing but abandonment. My phone buzzed continuously. Margaret, my lawyer, the CEOs of the companies I now controlled, all confirming the completion of transfers and acquisitions. But I turned it off. There would be time for business tomorrow. Tonight was for something else, though I wasn't sure what. Freedom, perhaps. Or just silence that wasn't filled with someone else's demands. The next morning arrived with headlines that moved faster than wildfire. Someone at the wedding had recorded video on their phone. Ashley's cruel declaration, the mass exodus, Ryan's desperate stumbling. It was uploaded before midnight and had 3 million views by dawn. "Wedding Day Massacre" was trending. Financial reporters who'd never heard of Morrison Holdings were suddenly experts on our family dysfunction. The business section ran photos that told the whole story without words. Ryan's face frozen in panic, Matthew clutching his phone like a lifeline, Lauren's mascara-streaked shock. But the photo that went truly viral was one I hadn't even known was taken, me walking away from the servants' table with perfect posture, my face calm while behind me the wedding collapsed into chaos. Someone captioned it, "The walk that destroyed an empire." By the second day, Morrison Holdings stock had fallen 68%. Trading was halted twice. The board called an emergency meeting that Ryan wasn't invited to. They voted him out in absentia, not that it mattered. There was nothing left to run. Creditors lined up with collection notices. The building they'd operated from for 20 years was foreclosed on before the week ended. Margaret emerged from the shadows like an avenging angel with a filing cabinet of evidence. She didn't just leak documents. She curated them into a narrative. Every innovation I'd created with Ryan's name stamped on it. Every crisis I'd solved while he claimed victory. Emails where he admitted he didn't understand basic financial concepts. Voice recordings of him asking me to handle it before important meetings. The story shifted within 72 hours. Business journals that had celebrated Ryan Morrison's vision, now dissected the invisible sister who ran everything. Former employees came forward with their own stories. David Chin gave an interview about how I'd saved Morrison Holdings with bridge funding while Ryan was passed out in his office. The Henderson deal was re-examined, with old man Henderson himself confirming he'd only agreed to sell because of his respect for me, not Ryan. 3 months passed in a blur of construction and contracts. Lexington Tower rose in the business district, bought with the profits from companies that now thrived under competent management. I hired Maya and Lewis first, giving them the equity Ryan had always dangled but never delivered. David Park became our CTO, finally treated as the genius he was rather than technical support. Even Mrs. Park, the seamstress from the wedding dress shop, now ran our in-house alterations for the corporate wardrobes we provided all employees. We instituted Sunday dinners, but these were different. A round table in our top-floor conference room, windows overlooking the city, everyone's voice carrying equal weight. No servants' entrance, no separate menu for staff, no invisible people doing visible work. Sarah, who'd watched my family diminish me for years, raised a glass one evening and said, "To the woman who turned a servant's table into a CEO's desk." The toast was repeated, but what mattered more was the laughter that followed. Genuine, warm, inclusive. Margaret and I had lunch monthly, no longer at truck stop diners but in my office, sharing stories of what we'd built from the ashes of what had banned us. "Matthew still calls me," she mentioned one afternoon. "Leaves voicemails asking if I can speak to you, convince you to help them. And I delete them without listening to the end. 20 years of exile taught me that some bridges are meant to stay burned." The call from Ryan came exactly 1 year after the wedding, almost to the hour. The number was unfamiliar, probably a borrowed phone. His voice was different, hollow, maybe honest for the first time. "I need to know something," he said, no preamble, no false pleasantries. If I had just treated you fairly, would you have saved us anyway?" I could have left him wondering. Could have twisted the knife one final time. But revenge had already been served, and cruelty without purpose was just another form of weakness. "Yes," I said simply. "I would have saved you every time, Ryan. That's the difference between us. You saw family as something to use. I saw it as something to protect. Until you showed me I wasn't family at all." The silence stretched, filled with 20 years of could-have-beens. "I'm sorry, Lexi," he whispered, and for once it sounded real. I hung up without another word. Not from anger or spite, but because some stories need endings, not epilogues. Outside my window, the city sparkled with possibility. My phone showed 17 messages from actual partners, real allies, people who saw me not as a function but as a force. The servants' table had been left far behind. But more than that, I'd built a new table entirely. One where no one would ever eat alone, serve in shadows, or disappear into someone else's success. The Morrison Empire had collapsed in 3 words. The Lexington Empire was being built one dignified decision at a time. If this story of calculated revenge left you breathless, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment was when Lexi typed those 3 words, "Cancel the deal," and $26 million vanished instantly. What was your most satisfying moment? Share it in the comments below. Don't miss more stories of triumph over betrayal. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a powerful story like this.